The night Dr. Warren Doyle left 5 critical patients with 1 nurse and called it a management decision, he was smiling. Welcome back to Steady Badge's Stories. I'm glad you're here tonight. If you believe the quietest person in the room is sometimes carrying the most weight, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. Whether you're in a snowstorm in Sudbury, a late shift in Saskatoon, or somewhere warmer than the rest of us tonight, this next story is for every person who was ever told they weren't enough to lead, right before they saved everyone in the room. The ice storm had been building since mid-afternoon, coating the highway into Elgin Valley in 2 centimeters of glaze by 6 p.m. and 3 by 9. By the time Quinn Hargrove arrived for her night shift at Elgin Valley General Hospital, the parking lot looked like a skating rink, and the wind was driving sleet sideways past the ambulance bay doors. She didn't complain about it. She rarely complained about anything. Quinn Hargrove was 37 years old, 5'6" in her sneakers. With dark brown hair she kept pinned tight and a face that people consistently described as calm, though the word they usually meant was unremarkable. She wore royal blue scrubs, the same shade every night, and her badge said RN beside the hospital's logo and nothing else. She'd worked the ICU night shift at Elgin Valley for 14 months. She was quiet, she was thorough. She stayed past the end of her shift without being asked, and she was the nurse that Dr. Warren Doyle had decided, somewhere in the architecture of his own arrogance, to treat as furniture. Doyle was waiting at the nurse's station when she walked in. He had his coat on, his keys were already in his hand. "Hargrove," he said, not looking up from the chart he was signing. "You've got the floor tonight. Fam called in sick, which means it's you and the kid." He nodded toward Finn Larson, a second-year resident whose hands Quinn had noticed shook slightly whenever Doyle raised his voice. 5 patients, all critical, all yours. I've got the hospital board dinner." He paused, smiled. "Try not to lose anyone." The ward clerk, Beth Osey, went still at her desk. "Dr. Doyle," Quinn said. Her voice was the same as it always was, flat, measured, no edge to it. 3 of those patients are ventilated. 1 is 48 hours post-C-section with a suspected pulmonary embolism. 1 is a bilateral crush injury whose potassium hasn't stabilized. I'm aware of my patient's conditions, Hargrove. Then you know 1 nurse and 1 resident isn't adequate coverage. Doyle looked at her for the first time. He had a way of looking at people that was designed to make them smaller. Quinn did not get smaller. "You complain about staffing every week," he said. "Notes in triplicate, emails to the charge desk, little memos about protocol." He picked up his keys and dropped them from one hand to the other. "So let's see what you actually know. 1 night, 5 patients, show me." He buttoned his coat and walked toward the exit. At the doors he paused, and Quinn thought for a moment he was going to say something reasonable. Instead, he said it loud enough for the family waiting in the hall to hear it. "She's got this. She's very devoted." The door swung shut behind him. Finn stared at the space where Doyle had been. "Is he actually?" "He's gone," Beth said quietly. Quinn set her bag down on the charge desk, looked at the whiteboard with the 5 names written across it, and said, "Then we start. Finn, pull every set of vitals from the last 6 hours and bring them to me. Beth, I need the last potassium on bay 6, and I need you to find out where the backup drug card is. Because if the power goes out tonight..." The lights flickered once. She didn't finish the sentence. The 5 patients in the Elgin Valley ICU that night had arrived by different roads. In Bay 1 lay Ivan Petrov, 78 years old, retired from the Canadian Forces after 22 years as a signals officer, currently sedated and ventilated following a cardiac arrest 3 days prior. He was tethered to machines that breathed for him, fed him fluids, and measured every fluctuation of his heart. In the front pocket of his gown, tucked against his chest where his daughter had placed it before visiting hours ended, was a small digital voice recorder. He had been dictating his memoirs from the hospital bed in whatever lucid hours he had. The recorder ran on batteries. It had been running since his daughter kissed his forehead at 7:30 and left. In Bay 2 lay Caroline Belair, 63, a retired French-language schoolteacher from Sturgeon Falls who had survived a triple bypass 4 days ago and was now running a temperature that shouldn't exist and a blood pressure that kept threatening to drop below safe margins. In Bay 3 and Bay 4, 6-year-old twins Leo and Sam Whitaker occupied adjacent beds, both admitted 48 hours earlier with severe viral pneumonia, following a week of what their mother had called just a cold. Their oxygen requirements had climbed every 12 hours since admission. They were, in the clinical language of the unit, trending in the wrong direction. In Bay 5 lay Renata Poirier, 32 years old and 32 weeks pregnant when she'd been brought in 2 nights ago by ambulance after a collision on the Sudbury bypass. Her daughter had been delivered by emergency C-section. The baby was upstairs in the NICU, doing reasonably well. Renata was not. Her right leg was swollen, her oxygen was dropping, and the morning team had flagged her for a possible pulmonary embolism, but hadn't yet confirmed it. In Bay 6 lay Gordon Slade, 46, a construction foreman from Espanola who'd been pinned under a collapsed scaffold 10 days before. He was awake, ornery, convinced his kidneys were fine, and very wrong about that. 5 people, 1 nurse, 1 resident who had, by his own admission, never worked a night shift without a senior physician present. Quinn Hargrove looked at all 5 bays in the first 60 seconds of her shift and made decisions that hospitals write committees about. She moved to Bay 1 first. Ivan Petrov's ventilator alarm sounded at 22 minutes past 9, not because anything had changed in his breathing, but because the power fluctuation had tripped the low-pressure sensor, and the machine needed to be manually cleared and recalibrated before it would resume. It was a 2-minute job for someone who knew how. It was a catastrophic countdown for someone who didn't. Quinn was already in the bay when the alarm sounded. Finn appeared in the doorway 15 seconds later, face white. "What do I?" "Nothing yet. Watch." She reset the ventilator. She checked the circuit. She adjusted the pressure setting by 2 centimeters and watched the waveform return to its rhythm. Her hands did not shake. They moved the way hands move when they have done the same action in the dark, in rotor noise, in conditions that made a hospital look like a quiet afternoon. Finn stared at her. He had never seen anyone move like that in a clinical setting. "How did you know to adjust the pressure and not just reset?" "Because resetting without adjusting would have triggered the alarm again in 3 minutes, she said. "When a vent loses power mid-cycle, the auto pressure drops to baseline. You have to recalibrate to the patient's last set value, or you're just buying time." She looked at him. "Write that down." He wrote it down. At 22 minutes to 10, the hospital lost primary power. It wasn't a flicker this time. It was gone. A full blackout that lasted 4 full seconds before the emergency generators kicked in. 4 seconds sounds like nothing. In the ICU, 4 seconds is long enough to hear every alarm in the unit go silent at once and understand exactly what that means. Emergency power returned in strips. Bay 1 came back first, Bay 2 flickered. Bay 5 stayed dark for a full 10 seconds longer than it should have. From Bay 5 a sound, not a scream. Renata did not have the breath to scream. It was a sharp, gasping cry, the kind a person makes when they know something is wrong and cannot put words to it. Quinn was already moving. She found Renata half sitting in the bed, oxygen monitor reading 86%, the portable unit that should have maintained her flow having cycled down in the outage. Quinn restarted it. She listened to Renata's lungs. She felt the right calf, tighter than it had been 4 hours ago. "Renata," Quinn said. Her voice was the same it always was. No alarm in it. "Your oxygen dropped during the outage. We're bringing it back right now." Renata's eyes found hers in the dark of the bay. "My baby." "Your daughter is upstairs. NICU has independent backup power. She is okay." "How do you know?" "Because I checked before my shift started." Something in Renata's grip on the bedrail eased by 3 degrees. Quinn looked at Finn, who had followed her in. "She needs a D-dimer and a CTPA if her SATs don't hold above 92 in the next 10 minutes. If I'm right about the embolism, she needs anticoagulation started tonight, not tomorrow morning. Doyle has to authorize." "Doyle is at a dinner. Call the on-call internist and tell them I'm initiating an urgent consult. Do not call Doyle." Finn hesitated. "Finn," Quinn said, "do you want to explain to her family tomorrow that we waited for permission?" He called the internist. At 10:40, Gordon's potassium came back at 6.1. Quinn looked at the number and said nothing for a moment. Then she looked at Beth. "Get me the calcium gluconate protocol, and find out where the crash cart is." Beth was already moving. Gordon himself was awake, watching Quinn from behind the bedrail with the studied suspicion of a man who had built things with his hands his whole life and did not entirely trust people who hadn't. "That number bad?" "It needs to come down," Quinn said. "How bad?" "Bad enough that I'm not leaving your bay for the next hour." He was quiet for a moment. "You were in the service." Quinn's hands paused for a fraction of a second over the IV line. "What makes you say that?" "My brother did 20 years with the Army. He stands the same way you do, like he's waiting for something." Quinn looked at Gordon, then back at the IV line. "Rest now," she said. "Let me work." He rested. She worked. It was Ivan Petrov who said it plainly, though no one heard him say it, not then. His voice recorder had been running since 7:30. It had caught his daughter saying goodnight. It had caught the unit settling into its 9 o'clock quiet. It had caught Dr. Doyle's exit speech from 30 feet away, the tone of it traveling clearly through the open bay. It had caught Quinn moving from room to room for 3 hours, her voice, flat and certain, telling Finn what to order, telling Beth where to look, telling Renata her daughter was safe, telling Carolyn her heart was holding, telling the twins' mother, who had somehow gotten past the nursing station to stand in the hallway, that the boys were being watched every 15 minutes, and no, she would not be asked to leave. At 11:14, Ivan's sedation had lightened enough that he surfaced briefly into something like consciousness. His eyes opened. He heard the unit around him, the quiet, controlled rhythm of a floor being held together by one person. He felt someone check his vent circuit with the particular efficiency of someone who had worked in chaos before. He couldn't see her face. But his hand moved slowly and found the recorder in his pocket and pressed the button to make sure it was still running. It was. At 11:30, Dr. Warren Doyle returned. He appeared at the ICU entrance in his evening clothes, smelling of wine and the particular confidence of a man who has decided he has arrived in time to take credit. His tie was still on. His coat was dry. He had valet parked. He looked at the whiteboard. All 5 names were still on it. All 5 monitors were showing vitals. "Hargrove," he said, his voice carrying the tone of a professor returning to find students who had not destroyed the lab. "Walk me through the night." Quinn was writing in Carolyn's chart. She did not look up. Bay 2 started running a fever at 10:15. I've got blood cultures pending and I started broad spectrum empirically while we wait. Bay 5 has a confirmed PE. Anticoagulation is running, authorized by the on-call internist. Bay 6 potassium came back at 6.1. We managed it for 90 minutes and it's now at 5.6. The twins in 3 and 4 had increased work of breathing after the power outage. I've increased their FiO2 and called respiratory, who came down from 2 south. Doyle stared at her. "You ordered anticoagulation," he said, "without my authorization." "I ordered it with the on-call internist's authorization, which is exactly within protocol. I am the ICU medical director. You left during a major ice storm with 5 critical patients and 1 nurse." Quinn closed the chart and looked at him. "The anticoagulation was right, the timing was right. If you want to contest it in writing, I will pull the chart." Doyle's face moved through several expressions. He settled on the one that looked like authority. "I'll take over the board review," he said. "You've done your part." "You'll find everything documented," Quinn said. "Vitals, interventions, consult notes, all time-stamped." He walked to the desk. He looked at the documentation. He didn't say anything else for a long time. The wing commander arrived at 3 in the morning. She came through the ICU entrance with a Canadian Forces duty officer beside her and an expression that people in uniform called composed and civilians called unreadable. Her name was Patricia Gale. She was 49, silver-haired, and she walked through hospital corridors the way people walk when they have spent years in places where the wrong step costs more than time. Beth stared at her from the nurse's station. Doyle, who had been making a show of reviewing charts, straightened when he saw the uniform. Wing Commander Gale looked around the unit once, then her gaze found Quinn. "Sergeant Hargrove," she said. The word moved through the ICU the way thunder moves, arriving before anyone is ready for it. Finn looked at Quinn, Beth looked at Quinn, Doyle looked at Quinn. Quinn set down her pen. "Ma'am," she said, not a greeting, an acknowledgement between people who know what they owe each other. Doyle cleared his throat. "This area is restricted to authorized personnel," Gale said without looking at him. "We're authorized." She held up a folder. "Wing Commander Patricia Gale, 424 Transport and Rescue Squadron, Royal Canadian Air Force. We received notification from the Provincial Emergency Network at 2340 that a critical care situation at this facility may have involved a service member performing outside their documented civilian scope." Her eyes moved to Doyle. "Specifically, we received the notification because your facility's emergency camera feed was cross-indexed with a federal triage alert." Doyle blinked. "I wasn't aware of any." "You were at a dinner," Gale said. She opened the folder. "Your director left this unit at 9:07 p.m. with 5 ICU patients, 1 registered nurse, and a second-year resident." She looked at the monitors, then at Quinn. "All 5 patients are alive and stable." "She performed outside her scope," Doyle said. The edge in his voice was the edge of a man who suddenly realizes the cameras have been running. "She modified ventilator settings, she ordered anticoagulation, she applied knowledge she is fully qualified to hold," Gale said. The unit went quiet in the way units go quiet when the truth is about to have a name. Quinn's full service record was not something she had advertised at Elgin Valley General. She had come north 14 months ago quietly, the way people go somewhere when they need to figure out whether they are resting or hiding, and whether those two things are really as different as they feel. Her badge said RN. It didn't say what she had been before. What she had been before was a search and rescue technician with the Royal Canadian Air Force. A SAR tech, one of roughly 300 people in the country certified to parachute into crash sites, perform advanced life support in the field, and bring people out of places where the helicopter could only get so close. She had deployed to floods in Manitoba, a downed aircraft in Labrador, a marine disaster off the coast of Newfoundland. She had, on 2 occasions, performed emergency field interventions that kept people breathing until an oar was reachable. Her call sign, the one her unit used, the one Gail spoke now quietly, was Phantom. Because she moved without making noise. Because she was there before anyone knew she was coming. Because by the time anyone noticed her, the work was already done. Doyle stared at Gail. She never disclosed. She disclosed her RN certification and her relevant clinical experience, Quinn said. I am not required to volunteer a military service record to a civilian employer. You performed beyond your role. Quinn looked at him for a long moment. I performed within my training, within my documented skills, within the scope I've maintained through continuing certification, and with the authorization of the on-call internist for every intervention that required one. She picked up the chart she had been working on. You left. What I performed was the job you walked out on. The silence that followed was the kind that gets remembered. Beth spoke first, her voice careful. The voice recorder. Everyone looked at her. Mr. Petrov in Bay 1. His daughter mentioned it this afternoon. He records his memoirs. He's had it running for weeks. She looked toward the bay. He had it in his pocket tonight. They pulled the recording with his daughter's consent at 4:15 in the morning. The audio was clean. The words Doyle had said at the nurse's station came through with the clarity of a man who had never considered he might be heard. 5 patients, 1 nurse. If she can't handle that, maybe she should have stayed in whatever small town she came from. And then 3 hours of Quinn Hargrove handling it. Finn Larson, listening, had to press his fist against his mouth to keep from saying something unprofessional. Wing Commander Gale listened with her arms folded. When the recording ended, she looked at the duty officer beside her, who had been writing since it began. Dr. Warren Doyle was placed on administrative leave pending investigation before the morning shift arrived. He tried once, near the exit, to suggest the situation had been mischaracterized, that he had remained in contact with the floor by phone. Beth pointed out quietly that his cell had gone to voicemail twice between 10 and midnight, and that the on-call internist had reached his personal phone on the 3rd attempt and left a message time-stamped at 12:47. Doyle said nothing more after that. The Provincial Health Authority's notification went out that same morning. A patient safety review was opened. Within the week, the review had expanded to include 6 other incidents over the previous 2 years. 3 of them nights when ICU staffing had been flagged as inadequate and signed off anyway, all on Doyle's authorization. One of those nights involved a patient who had not made it. That file was opened separately. Ivan Petrov came off the ventilator 11 days later. His daughter was there. So was Beth, who had come in on her day off because that was the kind of person Beth was. Quinn was not there. She was 3 bays away managing a post-operative complication. But she heard the news from the doorway and went very still for a moment before continuing what she was doing. Later, Ivan asked to speak with her. He was sitting up in bed, thin in the way people are thin after a long illness, his voice rough from the tube. He looked at Quinn the way old soldiers look at people they have already figured out. Phantom, he said. Her eyes moved to his face. I was Signals, he said. 22 years. We used to track your exercises up north. 424 Squadron. He studied her. You pulled someone out of a downed Griffon in 2019, near Cochrane. She said nothing. My nephew was the co-pilot. The room held its breath. He told me, Ivan said, that there was a woman who reached him before the weather closed in, that she moved like she had been there before, that she said, he paused, almost smiled. He told me, she said, you're not done yet, stay useful. Quinn looked at the window. He's still flying, Ivan said. There was a silence after that, not heavy, not sad. The silence of something that had mattered, still mattering even years later, in a way that had nothing to do with recognition or record. Rest now, Ivan, Quinn said. He almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. The 4 rules went up above the charge desk 6 weeks later, after the provincial review issued its preliminary findings. They were printed on cardstock, laminated, and hung at eye level, where everyone who worked the floor would see them at the start of every shift. No patient in this unit is unassigned after handoff. No nurse carries sole coverage for more than 2 ventilated patients without a physician on the floor. No administrator overrides clinical triage without documented clinical rationale. Staffing concerns raised in writing are addressed in writing within 48 hours. Gordon Slade, transferred to a step-down unit and doing slow, cranky, satisfying work on his kidneys, sent Quinn a card with a joke on the front and a handwritten note on the back that said, "Knew you'd been waiting for something. Glad you found it." Renata Poirier's daughter, born at 32 weeks, small and fierce, was named Elise. She went home with her mother on a Thursday in February, which in northern Ontario means the hardest part of winter is almost over. Leo and Sam Whitaker were discharged the same week, which their mother said was either a miracle or good luck, and Quinn told her it was neither. It was respiratory therapy and consistent monitoring, and the particular stubbornness of children, who almost always surprise you if you don't stop watching them. On a Tuesday evening in early March, after the overnight shift ended and the parking lot had finally cleared of ice, Quinn sat in her car for a while before starting it. She had come to Elgin Valley 14 months ago to rest. She had told herself that was what she was doing. Resting, not hiding, and she had been honest enough to know she wasn't entirely sure of the difference. She looked through the windshield at the ICU entrance. Through the glass she could see Finn at the charge desk, pulling charts with the steadiness he hadn't had 6 weeks ago. She could see Beth coordinating the morning handoff with the kind of ease that only comes when people have started to trust each other properly. She reached for her badge on the passenger seat and clipped it to her scrubs. Inside, the board was already filling. Finn looked up when she pushed through the doors. 3 overnight admits, 1 post-op, 2 medical. Who's our weakest? Bay 3, 74 years old, post-bypass. Sat's holding at 94 on 2 liters, but she was restless at handoff. Start there, Quinn said. She picked up the chart. The floor moved around her. Nurses, techs, the night resident doing his first independent rounds with something that looked, for the first time, like actual confidence. Ordinary people standing between other people and the worst moments of their lives. Doing it without medals, without headlines, with the kind of steadiness that didn't photograph well and didn't make the news. Still a mission. She had always known that. She just hadn't been ready to say it out loud until the night a man handed her 5 lives as a joke and walked away laughing. She walked to Bay 3 and got to work. Thank you for listening tonight. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone you know, a nurse or a paramedic or a quiet person who showed up when it mattered, leave their name in the comments. They deserve to be seen. And if you're new to Steady Badges Stories, subscribe, because we keep telling the stories of the people who don't tell their own. Take care of each other. Good night.